Toivonen shifted uncomfortably when she found herself standing in front of generals and marshals. A lot of generals and marshals. No one was there in person. However, that mattered very little when not only the field and division commanders were hall-conferenced in, but the theater commander herself was sitting there, boring a hole through you. A rather petite woman for Tauri standards, only about as tall as a human female, had her hands on her hips staring at the colonel. The glaring Tauri had light red skin that seemed to almost reflect against her surroundings, slightly blinding everyone the moment she beamed in. "I am curious as to why you have issued such a sudden briefing, human," High Admiral Nadia Asina said with a hint of annoyance. Toivonen noticed the Tauri's dark and short hair seemed to be a complete mess. "Ah, shit. I woke her up," she silently muttered to herself as the agitated admiral seemed to want to drill 2 holes in the colonel's head with her eyes. High Admiral Nadia Asina. She was one of the most decorated and longest-serving admirals in the Imperial fleets. However, due to her headstrong personality, she had been demoted and promoted more times than one could count, and it seemed she had innate dislike for humans. The Tauri woman flickered for a moment as her hologram fully synced with the rest of the room. Now, Lady Asina. Decorum dictates that we should at least hear Lady Toivonen out," a masculine and deep voice called out. A large Tauri male came into existence as he stared at the fiery admiral in disapproval. Standing at a firm 2 meters tall, the male had long, brown, flowing hair, and a beard that seemed to wrap around him like a lion's mane. His light gray skin almost gave a blue hue as the man's image blinked a few times before also sinking to the room. On his chest held the words, High Marshal Avadi Tsosori. "Bah! Lord Tsosori, I grow tired of these noble games you force me to play, as well as these humans you seem to favor so much," High Admiral Asina shot back. High Admiral Asina animatedly walked around the room. "I don't understand why you defend them so. Do you know about the unholy number of complaints that are forwarded to me because you refuse to rein in your pets?" she ranted. The Admiral stood up and walked over to the Marshal with her hands on her hips. Her tail flicked around in agitation, and her face scrunched as she criticized the Marshal. "Not a week goes by without an incident happening. We even had to create new gender policies." She flipped her arms in the air, pacing around the room. Toivonen raised an eyebrow as the Admiral just eerily walked through a desk, as if she was a ghost. The fidelity of Imperial holograms made it nearly impossible to tell the difference between a projection and real life. "Do you know how many of my soldiers alone have had unplanned pregnancies since incorporating humans? It's absurd! These things! They have more males than they know what to do with and breed like fire through a dry field!" High Admiral Asina raved while pointing at one of the human generals. The human that was seemingly singled out seemed more amused than admonished. "Let's not forget the fact that they used civilian freighters to bring in supplies!" High Admiral Asina yelled. All the humans shifted uncomfortably at the mention of the logistics corporation in question. "They blatantly ignored our instructions, and then were surprised to be riddled with holes and burned in the atmosphere!" Her arms lifted in exaggeration. Toivonen had to give her that one, but in fairness, humanity simply just didn't have enough ships. The war was on such an unfathomable scale that Terran logistics simply couldn't keep up. They were spread too far and too thin, especially with the new offensive. "While I agree that there are some issues and the human servicemen and women are improperly interfacing with the rest of the Imperial Armed Forces," High Marshal Tsosori's face seemed to twitch whenever dealing with the High Admiral. "There it is! Defending them again!" The High Admiral seemed to crack against something as she approached Tsosori. Toivonen just sighed internally. She was hoping to make this brief and avoid another shouting match between the 2 flag officers. "Lady Asina, you know full well we would have never made landfall or gotten even near the planet without their intelligence or preparatory work on the ground," he shot back, standing up as well. Sitting back in her chair, Toivonen knew that any hopes of a short briefing were dead. She watched the 2 flag officers froth at the mouth, with their petty squabbling while she put her arm on the table to hold her head up. If she was forced to endure another one of these spats, she might as well get comfortable. Toivonen was grateful for the High Marshal's support. It almost seemed like he truly understood the value of integrated and networked intelligence, combined with specialized teams to enable a larger fighting force, if it wasn't for the fact that it was obvious that this was his gambit for greater standing and influence in Imperial circles. the noble who saw the potential of humans and utilized it for the betterment of the Imperium. The idea of combined arms and the value of special operations as force multipliers seemed completely alien to those within the noble caste.
Completely ridiculous,
Toivonen muttered to herself. She was completely ignoring the argument, as was the majority of humans in the conference. Annoyingly, the Tauri officers were either nodding in acknowledgement when either side made a point, or were wrapped with panic, unsure what to do. The unprofessionalism and grandstanding these near-feudalistic officers displayed, in the name of their holy caste system, was amazing. How the hell were they the dominant species in their corner of the galaxy? How the hell did they accomplish anything? There was a reason why highly centralized dictatorships or autocracies tend to fail when it comes to military matters. Being loyal and controllable was a lot safer for these styles of governance. Competency just made you a threat. So how did the Empire last this long, and how were they able to retain competent leaders? Was it just a human problem? Toivonen watched the sway of High Admiral Nadia Sina's hips as she continued another tirade, this time about untitled human rudeness towards their aristocratic betters. The miracles of modern imperial medicine were truly astounding. The High Admiral looked like a fresh and spry woman in her mid-20s, at least by human standards, but she was actually the tender age of 230. And had served in the Imperial fleet for over 100 years. Toivonen was thankful that this was one of the vast luxuries the Empire shared when humanity was incorporated into their fold. She looked at her skin, glistening, soft, and clear. She had the face of a woman that freshly graduated university, and a body of a tight and toned 18-year-old. As if she wasn't over 50 years old with 2 children. The tailored stem cell technology the Imperials transferred to humanity made sure every human was effectively immortal to time. Coupled with human nanotechnology and Imperial materials science, cybernetic augmentation got a lot more interesting.
Colonel Toivonen, please share with us what you called us in for, so this uncompromising woman can be proved wrong!
High Marshal Sasori yelled. Snapping out of her reverie, Toivonen immediately stood up and gave a crisp salute.
Yes, sir,
she said, and walked towards a table with a datapad on it. She used the datapad to project a top-down map of the megacity and its outskirts. It was almost a full 3D rendition of the entire city. But the important part wasn't the city. It was the jungle surrounding it. The map highlighted enemy-controlled areas, known IADs, Integrated Air Defense, logistic lines, unit types, and troop concentrations. The entire room seemed to refocus and straighten up as they took in the highly detailed map, some letting out a breath of awe as they heard a ping and a new icon pop up. This map was being updated in real time. High Admiral Asina didn't let it show on her face, but she was impressed at what she saw. If she had such thorough and detailed intelligence when retaking their worlds from the Scourge, then how many lives could the Empire have spared retaking them? She suddenly looked over to High Marshal Sasori, and spied the man giving her a smug smirk out of the corner of his eye. The focus wasn't on the city, however, but known marked structures that were underground.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is a live 3D map of our current battle space,
Toivonen said swiftly and professionally. She paused for a moment, letting every commander study it before continuing her presentation.
Our reconnaissance teams have been working tirelessly to give us the full picture, and we have video and photo evidence of each icon present on this map.
Toivonen tapped on an icon. It was a red diamond with what seemed like a 2D capsule in it, and had an X going through both shapes. One tap highlighted the icon. A bubble popped up above it with text, Enemy Mechanized Infantry Unit, and showed its estimated size, an arrow indicating its predicted movements, and last known location. She double-tapped the icon and showed a video of Terralax soldiers loading into their IFVs and APCs. There was a gallery of media showing identified vehicle types, weapons, and gave a description of each.
I know Imperials don't use Terran symbology to identify units, so I'll be giving out training material to help you understand our system,
Toivonen said. She then tapped her datapad, which caused all of the officers in the briefing to receive a notification.
As of now, all of you can access this map and interface with it whenever you wish, she finished. Does anyone have any questions?
The colonel inquired. A flurry of murmuring was heard between the Imperial marshals and admirals, but a male human general raised his hand and went up.
Yes,
Toivonen called out to the general. Why hasn't this map been available since day one? He asked in an almost bored and monotone voice. The Imperial officers stopped their murmuring and turned to the colonel. He had asked what all of them wanted to know.
Good question, sir.
Toivonen happily smiled. She had officers ask pre-planned questions to avoid the Imperials jumping to conclusions or having any misunderstandings.
We would usually have a map up and ready before we would even make landfall, but due to unknown enemy electronic warfare and air defense, we're unable to utilize our surveillance drone effectively or perform proper SCAD, suppression of enemy air defenses, she answered. She tapped another icon, a blue one with a line going through it diagonally and an L at the bottom. The text Light Reconnaissance Unit popped up in a bubble above it, with a picture and description of human light armored vehicles. We had to go back to our roots and perform manned surveillance and reconnaissance. This takes a lot of time as they have to slowly and carefully approach their targets, she continued to explain. The room broke into more hushed conversations. This time they were satisfied with the answer, but still had more questions. Another hand went up from another human general. Yes, sir? Toivonen asked. The female human general seemed equally as bored as the last. They've all had this information for a while, and they had this briefing before. This was just a show to put on for the Imperials. Why haven't we struck any targets with indirect fire, or have launched any assaults if we know where their equipment and soldiers are? The woman asked, equally as deadpan as the last officer. A second preloaded question to help assuage Imperial concerns. Another great question, ma'am, she said confidently. She tapped another button, expanding the map to show all Imperial bases and units that surrounded the megacity. The magnitude of the situation was just a concept, until everyone saw it with their own eyes. It was only then they finally understood. They had to take this damnable place. Right now, we could, in theory, push all the way to the city. However, we don't have the manpower or resources to hold any ground we take, Toivonen answered the woman. The group of officers stayed silent as they listened to the colonel's explanation. Our current strategy would be to build up significant forces, destroy enemy supply depots, and immediately launch a sustained and precise artillery campaign. Toivonen tapped more on her datapad. The enemy icon suddenly started exploding on a hologram, as arrows appeared indicating friendly units pushing towards a specific axis of advance. The bombardment would target enemy command and control, logistical lines, and any massive troop concentrations our recon elements have found. The colonel explained as she highlighted entire areas. The hologram showed human artillery units bombarding and erasing entire square grids. After a few days of sustained barrage, it will be immediately followed up with a coordinated push by human Imperial forces, where the enemy is confused and disoriented. She continued to manipulate the hologram. Entire mechanized infantry divisions and legions promptly spawned, representing a fully stocked and reinforced campaign. The map then showed artillery continuing to rain down on enemy positions, never giving them a break, walking the Imperial and human army forward. Our goal is to take advantage of confusion caused by lack of enemy leadership and perform a thunder run to the enemy megacity and secure a beachhead, finally finishing her presentation. The room erupted into half-shouting as the Imperial officers argued whether or not this would work. Colonel Toivonen let the room bicker for a moment as she looked over at High Admiral Asina. The woman was quiet and in deep thought. Her tail flicked from side to side, even seated. An ineligible shout came from the back of the room. Everyone looked around to find the voice until they identified who it was. A tall, white long-haired, and angry Tauri Low Marshal. Low Marshal Farlino Tartha. Excuse me, ma'am? Toivonen asked while straining her ears. Your kind sent my troops to their death for what I assume was for this information, so I'll ask you again, Lady Toivonen, Low Marshal Otartha said hatefully. How are you sure they'll cave so easily? Low Marshal Otartha bitterly asked. Toivonen read the reports about what the asshole Findlay had orchestrated. He always made her job that much more difficult, no matter what unit he was in charge of. Or do you expect me to blunt the enemy's spears with what's left of my legion? She snarled. Toivonen forced herself not to sigh. She knew Miso hated to share any more information than what they absolutely had to, but she felt that shedding some light on why she had to make this sacrifice was called for. If you would all please direct your attention towards this structure, Toivonen said, while grabbing her datapad and unlocking the data after several biometric scans. An underground structure highlighted and started blinking near the southern approach of the megacity, in the middle of the jungle. Details started to expand showing the coordinates, use of the structure, and how far away it was from the front lines. The structure was highlighted in red, and the hologram gave a rough outline of every room and hallway in it. This is a former red-scaled Tyrolac underground mansion. It was converted into a resupply and staging area that they used to defend against any Imperial advance, she continued. Suddenly, an underground subway system started to highlight perpendicular to the MSR, main supply road, leading to the megacity. Roughly 2 weeks ago, during the 48th Imperial Legion's assault, we confirmed that this theater's overlord was using this location as his base of operations. Toivonen could hear murmurs from some of the Tauri marshals and admirals. Toivonen paused a moment, letting the officers discuss amongst themselves before continuing. 4 days ago, at 1300 hours, our artillery team that was directed by recon elements conducted a sustained bombardment of the structure using deep-penetrating high-explosive shells. The structure then collapsed, showing ruins. This was immediately followed with a raid conducted by multiple special operations teams, leading to the death of said overlord and the crippling of their command and control for this campaign. She concluded that element of the briefing. There was a brief silence in the room. Otartha sat there with her mouth flapping, unable to believe what she just heard. They killed the overlord? High Marshal Sasori had the most arrogant smile that seemingly occupied the entirety of his face, and he stared directly at the flabbergasted High Admiral. High Admiral Asina immediately looked away from the High Marshal, while snarling in displeasure. The discontent Tauri's face contorted between anger at remembering the distraught Low Marshal, and thoughtfulness at the fact that the humans dealt such a critical blow to Scourge Command. The Scourge operated by micromanaging, and if they cut off the head of the snake, then their army was effectively paralyzed until they were able to establish a command structure. "Are you sure?" High Admiral Asina asked. Both Toivonen and Asina looked at the now cowed Low Marshal Otartha. The poor woman looked like someone ripped her heart out. "Are you sure you killed him?" the Admiral questioned intently, while she turned to look Toivonen directly in the eyes. The Colonel weathered the Admiral's gaze for a brief moment before answering. "Yes, ma'am," she finally let out. Another manipulation of her datapad displayed the most recent actions conducted by conventional human military. "It's been proven when we push them on our patrols, the Tyrolacs display a high level of disorganization, and their QRF, Quick Reaction Force, doesn't respond quickly enough to be effective." Toivonen responded with convictions. The Admiral was shocked. The humans had successfully conducted a seriously crippling decapitation strike on the Scourge's command and control, under everyone's nose. They had to press their advantage while they had it. It would take a while before the Scourge found their bearings again. She had a job to do. She needed to speed up the resupply and reinforcements sent from the core worlds. This wasn't an opportunity she was willing to let slip by her. The moment she stood up and ready to disconnect, Toivonen spoke up. "Ma'am, where are you going? The briefing isn't over." The Colonel spoke and looked as if she was scolding the Admiral for getting up after not being dismissed. The Admiral stopped in her tracks and stared at the human. Never in her years as an Admiral had anyone spoken to her like that. She didn't know whether to be impressed by the bravery or enraged by the insolence. She could have, and should have thrown her in the brig. The Admiral's mouth opened momentarily to reprimand the Colonel for her insubordination, but that human's hard and unwavering gaze made the words stop in her mouth. Asina turned around to see every single pair of eyes were solely focused on her. Every single human present was still seated, staring at the Admiral with the same hard and reproachful look. She could feel each and every one of them chastise her from the looks in their eyes. "Ah," Asina muttered in realization. She was the one being insolent and disrespectful. "I apologize, Lady Toivonen," Admiral Asina said, while taking her seat again. Toivonen nodded at the Admiral and carried on with her presentation. Several more highlighted subway lines spawned on the map, along with several other structures. "As of 2 days ago, we have received intelligence that there is a massive subway system surrounding and connecting to the megacity." Toivonen continued here where she left off. The High Admiral and the rest of the Imperial officers listened diligently, as the briefing lasted almost another hour. The Colonel expanded on how the Tyrolacs were using this subway system to move large amounts of supplies and troops around to different fronts and several other discovered supply dens. It came to the surprise of the Imperials that the humans were preparing another wave of assaults with their secretive and elite special operations forces. Looking to her left, Asina silently and internally conceded that High Marshal Sasori was right. These humans were capable. But her pride would never allow her to admit that to the pompous and pampered man. He was a politician first, a noble second, and a warrior third. What was the human adage they liked saying?
A broken clock was right twice a day, and how right he was. These humans had not only uncovered information that could completely change the course of this battle, but already acted on it independently. Even for the headaches they induced with their chaotic misgivings, maybe it was time to look deeper into their capabilities and reevaluate their worth.